Welcome. This lecture is being given in support of English Olympiad students who will soon be writing the National English Olympiad examination for SACE, the South African Council for English Education. And what a wonderful theme it is. It commemorates both the 50 years since the existence of the English Olympiad and celebrates love, life, and land. Their theme, Let Us Celebrate, invites us to join in the celebrations and the ebullience, to pop the cork, to throw the colourful streamers, and be a part of the jubilation. If we take a look at the cover, designed by Julian Yeates, the silhouetted figures are clearly leaping, dancing, jumping, soaring through the air, reaching for the impossible, reaching for hope. Sparkles of colour enhance the sense of rejoicing. The circular shape suggests rotation, movement, vitality, and even eternity, having no beginning and no end. As you move through the anthology, you may want to consider whether it resonates with any of the texts in the anthology. The first thing we find as we dip into the pages of the anthology is a delight in words, as Julia Reid declares in her essay on love. It begins, "Perhaps what fascinates me most about writing is its malleability. With the aid of 26 strange shapes, I can break someone, be broken. I can build someone or be built. It is often the little words, the ones we glance over when we read, the ones that everybody thinks they know the meaning of, which are the most obscure, impossible to pinpoint. Before we know it, the words themselves have formed the nest in which she has grown up. And the metaphor extends to incorporate the interwoven strands of love and home, which intertwine seamlessly and inextricably to form the perfectly protective nest in which to grow. Her love of words is evident throughout her essay, and she doesn't immediately agree with the Concise Oxford Dictionary's definition of home as the place one lives. She offers simile upon simile to add an array of nuances, seeing home as a complex ecosystem made up of many parts. She believes it grows and lives and breathes. The type of love she explores is familial love, but she describes it in a unique way as being amoeboid in shape, and thus able to change its shape and incorporate paradoxical notions like protecting while still giving independence. She sees her house as a shell, and yet containing a plethora of emotions, a tenderness for all her family, including her pets. She sees love itself as a structure of ever-increasing proportions, a city in itself, a country, a world. She then moves away from the objective to a more personal warmth of memory for her dad as the tooth fairy while she was growing up, and the hilarious poem he wrote for her on her birthday. There are sentimental recollections of her grandmother's love for her, which was evident in the packets of jelly that she bought for her. And ultimately, she is aware of the inadequacy of words in trying to explain her love to her loved ones. She finally sums it all up as the security of knowing that tomorrow, when I wake up, I will not be alone. A few pages further on, we see the flip side of the coin in a father's love for his child, in a wonderful poem by Sylvia Fanucchi. Let's read it on page 10. You cannot know the fears I have as I think about you. I fear that I shall only live at your laughter, lie awake long nights while you sleep, so loneliness does not trouble you, nor hunger, nor thirst. Overwhelm your waking world with wonder, with the music of other worlds, your earlier home. Read to you poems written the night before, while you smile bewildered. Or, just when my very breathing begins to depend on you, even as your tiny fingers close around mine, some insensitive thing crushes your butterfly spirit. Shadows of a sun-darkened land flow over you, and the eclipse closes your eyes. I cannot live with the thought of having you, loving you any other way. A day without such care has no meaning. We shall find for you a name. Your name shall bring light. For me, this poem has always seemed to epitomize the fears of any parents when they first come home with their precious newborn baby. It was written in the 1980s when Fanucchi and his wife spoke about having a child at a time when there was seething violence in a South Africa fast hurtling towards change. A short time later, they actually did have a daughter. He begins the poem directly addressing the child. You cannot know the fears I have as I think about you. The tone is intimate, tender, fearful, protective. In stanza 2, I fear I shall live only at your laughter, lie awake long nights while you sleep, so loneliness doesn't trouble you, nor hunger, nor thirst. This stanza conveys how vulnerable the father feels caught up in his fears for his child. His whole world centers on his child. He feels he can only be fully alive if his child is happy. He is so concerned about his child that he stays awake while the baby is sleeping, simply to check that nothing troubles her. Naturally, the baby is very dependent on the parent, but he is equally dependent on the child. And in stanza 3, he says, just when my very breathing begins to depend on you. It is as if his very life depends on his taking care of this precious child. The image of the tiny fingers closing on mine. He cannot bear the thought of some insensitive thing hurting her butterfly spirit. The small letter I, which continues throughout the poem, indicates the father's vulnerability in relation to the child. His love for her is so intense and all-encompassing that he feels, I cannot live with the thoughts of having you, loving you any other way. A day without such care has no meaning. The enjambed lines all the way through the poem indicate that there is no end to his fears. There is no end to his joy and love and tenderness. Elsewhere in the poem, we see the meaning broaden to encompass the warring political situation and political oppression. And that also contributes to the fears of the father for the child. Darkness can symbolize poverty, fear, ignorance. Shadows of a sun-darkened land flow over you. And the eclipse closes your eyes. The poem concludes with a short 2-line stanza that highlights a sense of hope. We shall find for you a name, and your name shall bring light. The child's name will convey her identity, and there is a sense that this child will impact positively on society. Here, youth is presented as vulnerable and as bringing hope for the future. In the poem, Not Dead Yet by Andrew Reynard on page 18, he explores the other end of the spectrum, age and death. It begins by suggesting the difference of opinion on what makes a good subject for a poem. All good poetry deals with death, you said. And the oak tree outside my house is bare. But deep inside, I know that it is not dead. In a beautiful extended metaphor, the poem develops the idea of age by considering the oak tree's cracked bark. The leaves have long been shed, like a starved child it stands, lost in despair. It's a rather sad portrayal of loss and need in age. It furthers the discussion on an effective choice of subject for the poem. In the repeated line, and all good poems deal with death, you said. The argument intensifies in stanza 3 with the personification of the oak tree as he enters the debate. But the oak tree disagrees. It looks ahead to spring and the end of the winter's nightmare, for deep down it knows that it is not yet dead. The winter's nightmare is seen as transient in anticipation of spring. The persona agrees with the tree. There's life, not death, and it blooms everywhere. Even though good poems deal with death, you said. And he rejects the argument on this basis. In a moment of bravado, he retorts, so you can write with fear and live with dread, but I will flirt with joy and live with flair. For deep down, I know I am not yet dead. This poem chooses to celebrate life rather than death. It is composed of 5 tercets, suggesting the persona deals with age and death with equanimity. The concluding quatrain, so a typical structure of the villanelle, the concluding quatrain brings together the 2 themes of the poem. The oak's a lesson in life's endless thread, to rise above bare arms raised in the air. All good poetry deals with death, you said, but deep within, we know we are not yet dead. Notice how effective the repeated refrain is throughout the poem, and the line following it has been repeated with variation throughout the poem. This is a part of the villanelle format. The oak's life is a lesson not to succumb to the difficulties of age, to rise above bare arms raised in the air. It is quite a poignant message to strive to go beyond harsh physical realities, to realize that within us there is life. The repetitions show playful twists and turns on the theme of age and death, suggesting and emphasizing that good poetry celebrates life. On the other hand, sometimes death intrudes in a heart-wrenching way. Dylan Thomas wrote "Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night" in 1951, when his father was dying from cancer, and his relationship with his wife Caitlin was in jeopardy because of an affair he had with an American woman. He used the villanelle form, with its neat structure comprising 5 tercets, 3-line verses, followed by a quatrain, a 4-lined verse, to give vent to his emotions, much like the poem Not Yet Dead. This poem has 2 repeated rhymes and 2 refrains. "Do not go gentle into that good night" appears as a refrain throughout the poem, along with its other refrain, "Rage, rage against the dying of the light." In the first tercet, "Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should rave and burn at the close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light." This may appear as if the son is comforting his father. But as the poem develops, it is clear that it also represents the protest of the poet's child self against his imminent separation from his father. The rhythms seem to convey the sobbing of the distraught son. Dylan Thomas proceeds to consider all the types of men who should fight against death. Though wise men at the end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. People who are wise show knowledge, good judgment, and can share their insights with others. At the end of their lives, they know dark is right. In their wisdom, they know at this point death would be right for them. Yet, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Because their words have failed to have a significant impact on people, they cannot accept death. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds may have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Good men, the last wave by. This has a ring of finality, doesn't it? They are aware of how brightly their frail dreams might have danced in a green bay, but they regret that their flimsy and feeble deeds might have sparkled in a green bay, but they haven't accomplished this. In the fourth tercet, wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight, and learn too late they grieved it on its way. Do not go gentle into that good night. Here, Dylan Thomas considers wild men who sang and rejoiced, living their lives wildly and recklessly. Sadly, not realizing how quickly time goes by. He may have been inadvertently thinking of how quickly his own life went off track. In poems like Poem in October and Fern Hill, he idealizes his youth and his innocence. Here, they cannot go gentle into that good night. Notice the dynamic impact of those repeated refrains, conveying a sense of urgency and pleading as each group comes across as having regrets about the way they lived their lives and about what they failed to achieve, and thus cannot go gentle into that good night. Grave men, near death, see with blinding sight. Blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Serious men, too, have an epiphany as their blind eyes blaze like meteors and be gay. In a flash, they see with their blind eyes the joy they could have had, and in discontent they rage, rage against the dying of the light. In the last stanza, a quatrain, the poem moves away from general and philosophical language to embrace an extremely personal tone. And you, my Father, there on that sad height, curse bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Only in stanza 7 do we realize that he was talking about his father, desperately urging his father to grasp life with all his heart. He would even be glad to accept his father's curse if, in his rage, his anger, this would enable him to live. Note how powerful the conclusion is, bringing the two refrains together, portraying both his heartbreak at his father being on the sad heights of age and physical decay. This is clearly a threshold poem about death, and the poem explores Dylan Thomas's complex feelings about his own mortality. It is also a lament for the fact that his school teacher dad had never fulfilled his dream of becoming a poet. The villanelle form allows him to express the cycles of youth and age, of rise and fall, growth and decay. Simultaneously, the phrase good night presents a pun, as despite his heartbreak at the imminent death of his father, deep within he knows that the darkness of loss in pain and suffering is right. From the intensely personal, from home and familial relationships, we broaden our perception to land and country. This is the beautiful opening of Cry the Beloved Country by Alan Paton. It's on page 34. There is a lovely road that runs from Itopo into the hills. These hills are grass-covered and rolling, and they are lovely beyond any singing of it. The road climbs 7 miles into them to Carisbrook, and from there, if there is no mist, you can look down on one of the fairest valleys in all of Africa. About you there is grass and bracken, and you may hear the forlorn crying of the titihoya, one of the birds of the veld. Below you is the valley of the Umzimkhulu on its journey from the Drakensberg to the sea, and beyond and behind the river, great hill after great hill, and beyond and behind them, the mountains of Ngeli and East Griqualand. The grass is rich and matted. You cannot see the soil. It holds the rain and the mist, feeding the streams in every kloof. It is well tended, and not too many cattle feed upon it. Stand unshod upon it, for the ground is holy, being even as it came from the Creator. Keep it, guard it, care for it keeps men, cares for men. Destroy it, and man is destroyed. Where you stand, the grass is rich and matted. You cannot see the soil. But the rich green hills break down. They fall to the valley below, and failing, change their nature. For they grow red and bare, they cannot hold the rain and the mist, and the streams are dry in the kloofs. Too many cattle feed upon the grass, and too many fires have burned it. Stand shod upon it, for it is coarse and sharp, and the stones cut under the feet. It is not kept, or guarded, or cared for. It no longer keeps men, guards men, cares for men. The Titi Hoya does not cry here any more. The great red hills stand desolate, and the earth has torn away like flesh. The lightning flashes over them, the clouds pour down upon them. The dead streams come to life, full of the red blood of the earth. The men are away. The young men and the girls are away. The soil cannot keep them anymore. From the intensely personal, we read now this beautiful opening about land and country. This is like the beginning of a love song, with its tender cadences praising nature's loveliness. This is the poetry of compassion and the wailing notes of sadness and anguish. The novel brings in a cry for the beloved country, a cry for the broken tribe, a cry for the bereaved fathers, Khumalo and Jarvis. As the sun pours down on the earth, on the lovely land that men cannot enjoy, we hear the fear and anxiety in his heart. Yet, the night before the execution of the Reverend Stephen Khumalo's son for the murder of Arthur Jarvis, Stephen, his father, climbs the mountain outside the village. He sleeps on the mountain and wakes just before dawn. And this is how the novel ends. Yes, it is the dawn that has come. The Titi Hoya wakes from sleep and goes about his work of forlorn crying. The sun tips with light the mountains of Angeli and East Griqualand. The great valley of the Umzimkhulu is still in darkness. But the light will come there also. Ndocheni is still in darkness. But the light will come there also. For it is the dawn that has come, as it has come for 1,000 centuries, never failing. But when that dawn will come, of our emancipation from the fear of bondage and the bondage of fear, why, that is a secret. And so the novel ends with the coming of dawn, the coming of light and hope. Despite the tragedies, despite the fears, to carry us into the future. Well, nothing remains but for me to wish you all good luck as you prepare to write your National English Olympiad examination. Enjoy the rest of the journey, and please remember to click the bell below and subscribe.